He walked into the restaurant, with nothing, no reservation, no money, just hope for a warm place to sit. They saw a problem. She saw a person. One simple act of kindness turned into public humiliation as he was forced out in front of everyone. And just when it seemed like the world had judged him for good, her voice cut through the noise. "I'm the owner's daughter." Everything stopped. And in that moment, the story changed, not just his, but hers too. This isn't just about justice. It's about seeing someone before the world tells you not to. Rain pelted the streets of downtown like a warning. Luca Moreno stood on the edge of the sidewalk, his hoodie soaked through, shoes squelching with every step. The neon sign of La Bellaria flickered through the downpour, a fine dining oasis for the city's elite. He didn't belong there, but hunger and shelter weren't picky. He pushed open the heavy glass door, instantly swallowed by warm lighting, soft music, and the scent of roasted lamb. Linen-covered tables shimmered under crystal chandeliers. Heads turned. Conversations paused. He ignored them. Luca's fingers clutched the last relic of his dignity, a cracked wallet with a single coin. He slid into an empty corner booth, far from the velvet crowd, trying to shrink into invisibility. No menu, no waiter, just heat, dry air, and the dull ache of his stomach. From the back, a young waitress noticed him. While others whispered or rolled eyes, she tilted her head curiously. Then, quietly, she slipped a dinner roll onto a plate and made her way over. Luca didn't look up until she spoke. "You look like you could use this." Her voice was soft, unafraid, and it would change everything. Luca blinked, unsure if she was real or some angel of pity. The waitress placed the plate in front of him, a warm, golden dinner roll, steam curling in the air between them. "No charge," she added, her voice barely above the jazz floating through the restaurant. "And some water's on the way." He nodded once, unsure how to respond. No one had spoken to him with that kind of tone in weeks, maybe longer. Not charity, not judgment, just kindness. Amelia walked away before the manager could see her. She glanced back only once, catching him tear the roll gently in half, as if it were something sacred. He didn't devour it. He respected it. That was the moment. From her side of the dining room, she watched as he sat straighter, adjusted the cuffs of his ragged sleeves, and scanned the room with wary eyes, as if preparing for a fight he knew was coming. Amelia wasn't sure what drew her to him. It wasn't just pity. There was something quiet in his eyes, something he wasn't saying. She didn't know his name. But as their eyes met across the crowded floor once again, she knew she'd see him again. Luca had just taken the final bite of the bread when a voice sliced through the room. "What do you think you're doing?" The manager's shadow fell over the table like a storm cloud. Tall, stiff, and dressed in black, Mr. Callahan didn't wait for an answer. He yanked the plate away with practiced disgust. "This isn't a shelter," he sneered, scanning Luca's soaked clothes, his cracked wallet now visible on the table. "Get up! You're making the guests uncomfortable." Around them, conversations died down again. Forks paused mid-air. Luca swallowed hard. Shame flooded in, hot and instant. His fists clenched under the table, not from fear, but pride. "I didn't ask for anything," he said quietly. "Exactly," Callahan snapped. "You're loitering. That's a crime. I'm calling the police." Across the dining room, Amelia froze with a tray in her hands. Her heart dropped. She saw Luca's eyes not angry, not afraid, just tired, like this had happened before. She rushed forward. "Wait's not!" Callahan cut her off. "You're a waitress. Stay in your lane." But Amelia didn't move. Her tray trembled slightly, hands tight around it. As the manager pulled out his phone, Luca stood slowly. "I'll leave," he murmured. But it was already too late. The sirens weren't loud, not yet, but the flashing red and blue outside the windows cast a new light over the restaurant's golden glow. Gasps rose from nearby tables. Someone had already begun recording. 2 officers entered with quick, clip steps. One scanned the room. The other looked directly at Luca. "You match the description," the taller one said, stepping closer. "Sir, we need you to come with us." Luca raised his hands instinctively. "I didn't steal anything. I was just sitting." "That'll be sorted at the station." A pair of cold cuffs clicked around his wrists. He didn't resist. He didn't yell. But he did look to Amelia, who stood frozen just behind the bar, her tray now abandoned, her eyes wide with disbelief. "No," she whispered. Her feet finally moved. She stepped forward, voice rising above the murmurs and clinking glasses. "You can't arrest him. He didn't do anything." Callahan smirked from the side. "He was trespassing. Let the professionals do their job." Luca's eyes found hers. "It's okay," he said. But it wasn't. Because the truth was about to crack open, and it would start with one word Amelia had never said out loud in this restaurant. "Wait! Wait!" Amelia's voice rang out, sharp and sudden, silencing the restaurant like a slap. The officers paused mid-turn, glancing at her. Luca stood between them, head lowered, cuffs biting at his wrists. He looked like he wanted to disappear. Callahan scoffed. "Miss, enough. Go back to work." "I'm not just a waitress," Amelia said. Her voice shook not from fear, but from finally stepping into a truth she'd hidden for far too long. "I'm Amelia Blake, daughter of Thomas Blake, owner of this restaurant." A collective breath sucked in around the room. Someone dropped a fork. Callahan's smug smile collapsed. "What?" Amelia pulled off her apron slowly, letting it fall to the floor. She stepped toward Luca. This man was sitting quietly. He was hungry, not stealing. I gave him food because it was the human thing to do. The officers looked at each other. One lifted his radio. "We might need to double-check this call." Luca blinked, stunned. "You're the owner's daughter?" She nodded. "And if you take him, you'll be answering to both of us." The cuffs came off. In a place built on appearances and plated illusions, Amelia had just flipped the table, and everything was about to change. The silence that followed Amelia's revelation was broken only by the sharp click of expensive shoes against marble. Thomas Blake, the man behind La Bellaria's empire, strode into the dining room like a storm in tailored wool. His silver hair was perfectly combed, his eyes cold and assessing until they landed on his daughter, standing not behind the bar, not in her waitress uniform, but beside a homeless man, apron discarded at her feet. "Amelia," he said, low and dangerous. "What the hell is going on?" She didn't flinch. Her heart was thundering in her chest, but she met his gaze squarely. "I gave him food," Callahan called the cops. "They tried to arrest him for sitting down." Thomas looked to the manager, who stammered out his defense, sweat beginning to form on his brow. "Sir, he came in off the street. No order, no reservation. It was a disruption." "He was hungry," Amelia snapped, cutting him off. "And I've watched you ignore real problems in this restaurant while throwing people out for wearing the wrong shoes." Thomas raised an eyebrow at her tone. Luca shifted, unsure whether to stay or bolt. "Do you know what this looks like?" her father asked. "Yes," she answered, voice steady. "It looks like a daughter who's tired of playing silent." Around them, waiters had frozen mid-service, wine bottles half poured. The officers stepped back, sensing this wasn't a legal matter anymore. It was a family storm years in the making. And in the middle of it all, Lucas stood like a ghost who had accidentally walked into a palace. He wasn't sure why she was defending him, only that no one ever had before. Not like this. The night air hit Luca like a slap cold, sharp and sobering. The door of La Bellaria closed behind him with a soft thud that somehow echoed louder than the restaurant's chaos ever did. He stood on the curb in silence, the cuffs gone, but the shame still wrapped around his wrists like invisible steel. Rain drizzled lightly now, the downpour reduced to a ghost of its earlier fury. Lights from passing cars streaked across puddles at his feet, and his reflection looked more like a rumor than a man. He didn't know what had just happened. One moment, he was an invisible stain on a white tablecloth world. The next, a woman with fire in her voice had spoken his name into power. Amelia Blake, no longer a kind waitress with a soft smile, but the heiress of the very empire that had tried to throw him out. He should have thanked her, should have stayed, but pride had gotten there first. He didn't want to be someone she saved. He wanted to be someone who didn't need saving. So he kept walking, hands stuffed in damp pockets, jaw clenched, heart confused. Behind him, the glow of La Bellaria faded, and ahead only shadows. The shelter was quiet by morning, the kind of stillness that only comes after nights heavy with unspoken stories. Luca sat on the edge of his cot, tuning his guitar with practiced fingers and half a mind, his stomach still hollow but his thoughts heavier. That was when he noticed the envelope, not crumpled or shoved like most things here, but neatly placed beside his guitar case, almost reverent. His name was scrawled in graceful handwriting across the front. He hesitated before opening it. Inside was a folded note, hand-written ink, smudged slightly, where the writer had paused, or maybe hesitated. "You don't owe me anything," it read, "but I'd like to hear you play again. Come tonight. One song. That's all." Tucked with it was a flyer for an open mic night downtown. Her name wasn't signed, but he knew. Of course he knew. Amelia. For a long moment he just sat there, thumb brushing over the paper, reading the words again and again. No one had ever asked to hear him, not really. And yet, someone had left this letter, as if his voice mattered. That night, he didn't eat. He tuned his guitar, and he walked toward the music. The venue was tucked between a pawn shop and a closed-down bookstore. Nothing fancy, just a narrow room lit by strings of amber bulbs and humming with quiet anticipation. The crowd inside buzzed over drinks and shared laughter, not noticing the man who slipped in, guitar in hand, coat still damp at the edges. Luca scanned the room, half hoping he'd imagined the invitation. Then he saw her, Amelia, seated alone at a corner table. No glass of wine, no entourage, just her and her eyes locked on him the moment he entered. She smiled, softly but without apology, as if to say, "You came." When his name was called, Luca stepped onto the tiny stage that barely fit him and his guitar. No grand gestures, no words. Just a deep breath, a clearing of the throat, and then music. His voice was low, husky from cold nights and swallowed pride, but the moment it filled the room, silence followed. The song wasn't perfect. It wasn't polished, but it was real. Every chord, every lyric told of hunger, of being unseen, of that single moment when someone decides you're worth the risk. When he finished, the room erupted, but Luca only looked at her. The next morning found them in a quiet corner of a tiny cafe, the kind with chipped mugs and creaky floorboards, where no one cared who your father was or what kind of shoes you wore. The rain had returned, tapping gently at the windows like it was listening in. Amelia sat across from Luca, her coat draped over her chair, fingers curled around a cup that had long since gone cold. He looked tired, not just from sleep, but from years of being on guard. She had seen him on stage, vulnerable and open, but now he was armored again, sipping slowly, eyes cast down. "I shouldn't have let you walk out like that," she said, voice low. He gave a small shrug. "I've walked out of worse." The silence between them wasn't awkward, it was careful. Like neither wanted to ruin the fragile truce forming in the steam above their coffee. Amelia told him everything, how she worked under a fake name, how her father insisted she learn the business from the floor up, how she was tired of being just a name on the letterhead. He listened. Then he spoke. About his mother. About the gigs that never paid. About the bruises that weren't always visible. And somewhere between the stories and the silence, a strange warmth settled between them. Not quite forgiveness, but the beginning of something else. La Bellaria looked different by night, softer, warmer. as though it too was trying to rewrite its past. The chandeliers still sparkled, but the edges of the place felt less polished, more real. Amelia stood by the bar, directing servers and adjusting candles, her eyes darting now and then to the small platform in the corner, not a stage, just a patch of space cleared between the tables. That was Luca's only condition. No spotlight, no spectacle, just music. When he finally walked in, guitar slung over his back, hair brushed, but clothes still worn and honest, Amelia felt her breath catch. He didn't smile, but he nodded. That was enough. The guests were a different crowd tonight, younger, curious, invited personally by Amelia to attend the first Acoustic Friday. No one whispered this time when Luca took his place. He tuned the guitar slowly, fingers steady despite the hum of nerves beneath. Then he began. No introductions. Just chords that built into something raw and unfiltered stories of street corners, stolen moments, and the ache of being invisible. The room quieted into reverence. Somewhere in the back, even Callahan stood still. And Amelia? She watched with quiet pride, heart finally aligned with the sound of his strings. The final chord faded into silence, and for a moment, the restaurant held its breath and then erupted. Applause, not polite but heartfelt, rolled through the room like a warm tide. Glasses clinked, chairs shifted, and conversations sprang to life with a kind of energy that only music can summon. Luca gave a small, almost shy bow before stepping down, eyes searching instinctively for Amelia. She was near the fireplace, half hidden behind a pillar, her smile blooming slow and real as she raised a glass toward him in quiet salute. He didn't know how to respond, so he smiled back a soft, uncertain curve of his lips. That's when the air changed. Thomas Blake, in a charcoal suit and old-money posture, rose from a nearby table, his expression unreadable. He crossed the room slowly, every eye subtly tracking him. Luca tensed. He braced himself for disapproval, for a subtle threat wrapped in expensive words, but instead, Thomas extended a hand. "You've got something," he said. "Maybe it's not polished, but it's honest." The room waited. Luca hesitated, then shook it. A flicker of surprise crossed Thomas's face, just for a second. And in that brief, fragile moment, something shifted. A door cracked open. The city buzzed beneath him, distant and golden, as Luca stood alone on the rooftop of the shelter with the wind tousling his hair. In his hands was the envelope, thick paper, crisp edges, and inside, a formal offer on Thomas Blake's letterhead. A contract, regular paid performances at La Belleria, exposure, stability, recognition. And yet the paper felt heavier than its weight, like it demanded more than music, like it demanded trust. Trust in the very world that once labeled him a stain. He folded the letter once, twice, tucked it into the inside pocket of his frayed jacket, and stared out into the glow of streetlights and soft clouds. Down below, cars hummed, and people moved forward with purpose. Luca had never stood this high without feeling like he might fall. But now? Now he wasn't sure if he wanted to jump or fly. In the quiet between sirens, he thought of Amelia, her eyes that never flinched when they met his, her voice rising for him in a room meant to silence people like him. Maybe the offer wasn't just a contract. Maybe it was a bridge. Still, he hesitated. After all, what does a man do when the world that once turned him away suddenly opens its doors? The restaurant had emptied for the night, chairs stacked, candles snuffed, and silence thick in the air except for the voices rising from the corner booth. Amelia leaned forward, eyes burning, as Luca paced in front of her, fingers raking through his hair. "It feels like a trap," he snapped. "The applause, the handshake, the contract, it all feels like I'm part of a plan I didn't make." She stood, her voice calm but edged with fire. "It's not a plan, Luca. It's a chance. You earned every second of it." "Because of you," he said bitterly, turning to face her. "Because you spoke up. Because you made them look at me." "Yes," she answered, her voice rising. "I made them see you because you deserve to be seen." The words hung between them like an open wound. Neither moved. The tension wasn't just anger, it was everything they hadn't said since the night she offered him bread. The silence broke like glass when Luca stepped forward. "I don't want to be your project," he whispered. "You're not," she whispered back. And then, like something inevitable, their lips met, not in sweetness, but in fire. It wasn't neat. It wasn't safe. But it was real. La Bellaria looked nothing like it once had. The chandeliers still sparkled, but beneath them now were laughter, jazz, mismatched guests, and the warm hum of something far less polished joy. The name had changed too. Above the door, in elegant gold script, a new sign read, Moreno's Nights. It was still Thomas Blake's restaurant, but now it had Luca's soul and Amelia's fire. Inside, Luca sat on a low stool near the window, guitar cradled in his lap, his voice carrying over the clink of glasses and hum of conversation. His clothes were still simple, his shoes still worn at the edges, but now they carried pride. Across the room, Amelia poured wine for a pair of newcomers, smiling easily, her hair pinned up with the same defiant grace she'd worn that first night. Their eyes met across the room, and she gave him a look that needed no words. This was theirs, not given, not stolen, built. People no longer whispered about the poor man at the table or the heiress behind the bar. They came for the music. They stayed for the feeling. And every Friday night, under soft lights and open doors, Luca played the song that changed everything,